This meeting is being recorded.
Oi, boa tarde, gente. É uma alegria estar aqui com vocês hoje. Eu primeiro quero agradecer a presença de todos vocês. Acho que a gente está com uma sala já com bom número. Agradecer ao professor Nick Couldry por estar aqui conosco hoje, fazendo a 7ª palestra do anual, de uma série anual que a gente está fazendo em comemoração aos 10 anos do programa de pós-graduação em mídia e cotidiano da Universidade Federal Fluminense. Eu sou Raquel Bertol, vice-coordenadora do programa. A gente está muito feliz de poder, justo nessa semana, também fazer esse evento em que a gente está na última semana de chamada e de inscrição nos processos seletivos da nossa pós-graduação para mestrado e doutorado. Então, também convido todos vocês a visitarem nossas redes, nossos sites, para conhecerem nossos projetos, nossas linhas de pesquisa. E vou, com alegria, também agradeço muito o professor Adilson Cabral, que está aqui hoje com a gente. Ele vai fazer a mediação desse evento, desse debate, desse encontro. Vocês todos vão poder fazer perguntas. Eu espero que seja um momento de muitas trocas, como tem sido os nossos debates nessas séries mensais que a gente tem feito no PPGMC. Então, agradeço muito a presença de todos e estou passando, Adilson, para você apresentar, né, o professor Adilson, do nosso programa, já há muito tempo, também aqui professor titular da UF, coordenador do grupo Emerge, e ele vai, então, apresentar o professor Nick, conversar com vocês, e lembrando que a gente tem a tradução, vocês podem ouvir aqui na parte interpretação, vocês podem ouvir as versões traduzidas, né? Então, fiquem à vontade para também participar e não deixem de botar a presença de vocês aqui na lista. Então, um ótimo debate a todos. Muito obrigada, Adilson, Nick, e estamos por aqui. Obrigada, gente.
Ótimo, Raquel. Muito obrigado. Boa tarde a todas e todos e todes. É uma ótima oportunidade assim, da gente ter mais um debate aí dentro desse ciclo de comemoração dos 10 anos do nosso programa, né, em mídia cotidiano. E aí recebendo o Nick Couldry, que é um autor de referência nessa discussão da transição midiática e justamente dessa problematização que as grandes empresas, os grandes conglomerados de mídia digital vêm trazendo em relação à nossa vida cotidiana, né? E por isso que ele faz parte, ele é uma referência que a gente, né, pensou quando desenhando esse ciclo. Eu, particularmente, nas disciplinas, eu venho trabalhando com esse livro mais recente dele, Causes of Connection, e a discussão que ele vai trazer está relacionada justamente a uma reflexão sobre o espaço global de comunicação e interação social que se construiu ao longo das últimas 3 décadas por meio de uma internet comercializada e do surgimento de plataformas digitais, né? O professor Nick, ele é professor de Comunicações midiáticas e Teoria Social da London School of Economics and Political Science, e desde 2017 também é membro do corpo docente do Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society da Harvard University. Então, Nick, congratulations, welcome for your lecture, and have your time, and I hope we have some special moments here today.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'll just get my screen ready so we can share that. There we are. Okay, well, hello, everyone. And thanks to Professor Cabral and to Professor Bertol for their invitation to me to speak today and for their organization. It's really great to be speaking to you all again at Fluminense. And in fact, I vividly remember my last visit to Niterói in May 2019. It was a day of very heavy rain, extremely heavy rain, but you gave me a very warm welcome. And so it's nice in a way to be back with you again. So what I want to talk about today, as my title suggests, is space. But I want to connect issues of space to the issues for human solidarity in the 21st century. I'm going to talk about space and a particular form of space that may be unfamiliar, that I will call the space of the world. But before we get to that, I just want to stress how difficult this topic is. Space is obviously important, but it's very hard to think about space. As a famous sociologist said, Alfred Schutz, the environment is one of the least clarified terms used in the present social sciences. It's one of the hardest things to get really clear about. But as I'll explain, it's very, very important to do that today. Because space is obviously very important. And we know that from another sentence I want to introduce you to from the philosopher Karl Jaspers, writing in 1941, where he said a really important thing for us in communication studies. He said, "What shall I do?" which is the question of ethics through the millennia. What shall I do presupposes a different question. How is communication possible? Now, Jaspers doesn't mention space in that quotation. And he wasn't talking about space, it seems. But the space of the world that I want to talk about is exactly the space of communication that has been unfolding for all of us as billions of people across the world have come to use social media platforms over the past decade or two. That's what I want to talk about. But just again, to emphasize how difficult it is to be really clear about space, I want us to take us back to a period of the 1980s. This was before everyone had access to the internet, and of course, long before social media platforms were imagined. But in the 1980s, this was a time of tremendous innovation in social theory and cultural theory, particularly around the question of space. But although the work of that time, the most important work of that time, seemed to be about space, actually, it was always just about space as a container. As two geographers put it, spatial structure is just a medium through which social relations are produced and reproduced. There was a lot of cultural theory at that time, as some of you may remember, which all talked about globalization. The globalization of cultural flows was the big theme at that time. Sometimes with the additional point that when you get local, the flows of meaning become more uncertain and more complicated. But again, this was looking at the space of the world as just a medium through which meaning circulates. And then there was more radical work, which argued that geography should look at how resources are unequally distributed in space, what Dori Massey called the power geometry of space-time compression. But again, this was looking at how resources are distributed in space. Space is a medium. And all these important types of work, which were the leading forms of thinking about space 40 years ago, all of them left unexamined. They didn't ask about the contribution of space itself to the structuring of knowledge. They didn't ask the question, would it make a difference if space was configured in a different way? There was just one theorist from this time, maybe from 10 years later, Manuel Castells, who started to sense that something very big was already changing. He developed the famous theory of the network society. which some people have criticized for being, if you like, an engineering model of society. Technological networks determine a particular type of society. So he is interpreted. In fact, I think he was more subtle than this. Is that a problem? I can hear someone talking. Is there a problem with the sound or something?
No, for me, it's quite good.
Okay, good. I'll keep going. So Castells is often criticized for believing in technological determinism, but in fact, he had a much more interesting idea that there was a tension here in the network society. Let me give you a longer quote from Castells, a very interesting one, where he said in his famous book, The Rise of the Network Society, infinite social distance is created between the meta-network of the internet and individuals' activities, locales. It's not that people, locales, or activities disappear, he said, but their structural meaning thus subsumed in the unseen logic of the meta-network. And then he said something very interesting. The new social order, the network society, increasingly appears to most people as a meta-social disorder. What he meant was that we were continuing to live socially wherever we were as we connected to the network society. But what this added up to, the consequences, didn't seem right. They seemed like a disorder in the way the social was being put together, a meta-social disorder, a disorder about the way the social is put together. This is an interesting idea, and I think he was right to see what was coming. In his later book, Communication Power, in 2009, he keeps this focus on the tension between the large networks and the local meanings, but he says less about our agency in all this. A quote from that book says that we had to reprogram the networks of our minds by reprogramming the networks of our communication environment. And he's sort of drawing there on brain science, as if somehow our brains get reprogrammed when we plug in to computer networks, which doesn't leave much space for our agency. So although he had that important insight nearly 30 years ago about the potential disorder that was coming for us, he didn't develop it further. So we need to think about this a different way. Let's look at some possible other ideas that might help us get started. Because what we're going to need to think about is the changing relations between information space, how information circulates, the social space of which we're part, and the physical space where we live out those social relations, while holding on to a sense of our own agency in all of this. That's what we need to understand. One older writer who I think is still really helpful is the historical sociologist Norbert Elias, who, with my work with Andreas Hepp, we've drawn upon, and his concept of figurations. I haven't got time to go into that, but I just want to give you one quotation which gives a sense of why Elias saw things very clearly when he looked at the beginnings, the very beginnings of networks through media in the 1970s and 80s. Elias wrote that people often forget that social developments are always to do with changes in human interdependence. Because if we give no consideration to what happens to people in the course of social change, changes in figurations which are always composed of people, then any scientific effort might as well be spared. In other words, he's saying, if when we're talking about technology, big structures, big networks, societies, if we forget the impacts on people, then we might as well not do academic work at all, because it's the effects on people that matters in the long run. And let me just give you one other inspirational quotation, which comes partly from work from Latin America. It's a book which is mainly forgotten now, by two computer scientists, Terry Winograd from Stanford University and Ricardo Flores, who was from Chile and who became a minister in the Allende socialist government in Chile in the early 1970s. And they published this book called Understanding Computers and Cognition. And in the book, they made the fundamental point that when we design tools like computers, we're not just designing those tools, because those tools get embedded in our lives. So when we design a tool like a computer, we are designing a way of being, which is a very deep point that I think we've forgotten about for the past 40 years nearly since they wrote that amazing book. So let me then come to the question that I want to focus on in this lecture, which is, rather than just thinking about the network connections, the computer-based network connections, what we need to do is think about how they become the precondition for something else, which is our real focus. And that something else is what I call the new space of the world. This new space of the world is what emerges from all the ways that we use and interact through the network space of computers. It's a new space of communication. It's a new way of being for us that's developed in the past 20, 30 years. And it's a topic that we're certainly now registering in everyday life. It's a fundamental part of our life, and we're registering increasingly the problems with this. There are so many debates about the problems which social media are causing in everyday life, in mental illness, in politics, and so on. And we'll come back to politics later. But my argument is that so far we don't have the right language to describe what's really changed. So let's try and think about getting that language right. In other words, I think at the moment we sense something is very wrong and difficult that's changed with our world, but we're not talking about it because we don't have the right words for it exactly. We keep raising false flags, using the wrong language. So to give you an example which came out of a recent scandal concerning Facebook and Instagram, you may remember that in September 2021, Frances Haugen, who was a whistleblower inside Instagram, revealed a lot of internal Instagram documents, which showed that Instagram really knew that its platform was having terrible effects on the mental health of many teenage girls around the world. They wrote a long article about this. But I don't want to talk about that article. I want to talk about a phrase that the Wall Street Journal writers used. They said at one point, Instagram is the online equivalent of the high school cafeteria. It seems an easy thing to say. It seems obvious. Surely social media just convert our old world into digital form. But that's in fact exactly the wrong thing to say. That fundamentally misunderstands what is going on. Let me explain why. Let's think about what Instagram really is. Instagram, as we know, is not a physical space. It's built through software, and it's a space of continuous data capture. It's a space where we don't look at each other, each of us looking at each other the way that others are looking at us, as we do in physical space, but it's driven by algorithms. So the way I appear to you right now is probably determined by various algorithms, and it could be changed. It could be different from the way that you're appearing to me, linked to perhaps your history of using social media. So it's not a space of reciprocal glances. It's a space driven by appearances, driven by algorithms. And it's a space which, because it's so large, 1 billion people or more are on Instagram across the world, we can go on Instagram and come up close to people and media contents which are from very far away. Whatever it is that Instagram wants to drive towards us because it thinks it will get us to engage more. Those are three basic features of the way digital social media platforms work. Let's ask a simple question. Is there any high school cafeteria in the world that has any of these features? Permanent surveillance, the way we look at each other determined by algorithms, not our eyes, and the ability to see things from the other side of the world from people who are not even in the room. No, there's no high school cafeteria like that. Instagram is a fundamentally different type of space. Because Instagram is part of the computer-based space of the world that I want to talk about. What I mean then by this space of the world is the social world in which we are now living whenever we do what we now do every day, which is to spend our time continuously on digital platforms that are not physical spaces, but they're computer constructed, intensively managed grids of patterning our behavior. And a legal theorist, Karen Jung, has called this a world not just of a nudge, but of the hyper nudge, where our behavior, as on TikTok in particular, is being nudged every moment as everything we do on that platform is tracked. So the space of the world is the social world that emerges out of us all using social media. Some sociologists talked before social media that we were moving to a post-social world. Karen Norsatina said that in 2001. But I don't think this that we're living today is a post-social world. Exactly the opposite. It's very social, but it's a radically different social world because it's unfolding in a space that has radically different properties from the space of the old social world, the space of the social world that existed before digital platforms. So what are these different properties of the new space of the world? I've already hinted at some of them, but let's go through them a little more carefully. Well, when we are on platforms interacting with each other, we're in a new type of space, a space that makes possible new types of relations that expose us all the time to people and media contents, images, voices, videos, and it exposes us to them regardless of distance, regardless of how far people away are, regardless of whether they're from a radically different social world from ours. And it does this at a speed that's so fast, it's almost instantaneous. When it does this, it overrides all the normal social boundaries that keep one context separate from another, one family different from another family, one room different from another room in the pre-digital social world. But in our space of the world, those boundaries fall away. A second key property is that whereas in everyday offline space, we're used to just moving around as we want, the way we move around in space only changes what our bodies can see. It doesn't have an impact on how our behavior gets organized. We move freely in space, but that's not true on online platforms, because the things we do on a platform, the places we are and move around to online on that platform affect how we're evaluated by the platform. They affect Facebook's social graph, which is based on who we go to talk to. They affect TikTok's view of the content it wants to send us next time. So we don't move freely in this space of the world. What we do and where we move is an input to an algorithm. And then there's a third fundamental property which is linked to that our engagement in the platform becomes an output, an economic output that the platforms maximize to make money. Again, that's not the way the physical world works. It doesn't make a difference to anyone whether I walk left or walk right in front of my house or through my garden or on my way to my friend's house. No one knows, no one cares. That's not true on a digital platform. So these are fundamental differences of the platforms that make up today's space of the world. They're part of a managed space, managed by commercial platforms. And yet at the same time, because we spend so much time on these platforms, we increasingly talk about what goes on there as if it is what's really happening in our societies. We talk about what we find out through social media as if it was our knowledge, as if this was true knowledge, what's really going on in our societies, forgetting that these are what's going on platforms that are being managed by businesses for certain purposes. And there's a final fundamental property that the bad stuff in the world, which is of course always there in the world, is just a click or two away. Someone posts a horrific image in our news feed, we see it, we maybe don't want to see it, but it's there because someone else has circulated it to us. And because of these many properties, to simplify a little bit, we end up living in a space of the world which is like a different sort of ecology from the one we lived in before the internet and before social media. It's a space that has ecological properties that I want to argue are not just accidentally bad some of the time, but which are inherently toxic, inherently negative as an ecology. They're bad ecologies. That's what I believe, but I want you for the next few minutes just to, even if you disagree, just suspend disbelief for a moment. I'll come back to more evidence in favor of what I just said later on. I want you to leave that to one side because I hope I've already so far shown you that thinking about today's space of the world gets us to some very interesting features of our life today. We need to think about the space of the world. And if we think it's possible even that today's space of the world is potentially toxic, then the next obvious question we should ask is, why did we not see this coming? Why didn't we do something to prevent this happening if it really is so toxic as some people believe? And I think the main reason why this just happened and we did nothing about it is very simple. That before, in the early 1990s, as the internet was starting to develop as part of everyone's life, in the mid-2000s, when social media platforms were developing, no one had the idea that the space of the world was something that anyone or anything could design. It was just a deep feature of everyday life that was beyond any of us actually changing it. But then it suddenly was something that could be changed, that could be designed, that could be driven to suit business models. What I want to do next is to tell you a story, if you like, about how this came to happen. I want to tell you a fable because what happened in the past 30 years that's led to this radically new space of the world in some ways is so strange that it's as if we're now waking up from a dream. So we need to go back and tell ourselves the fairy tale or the fable of how this could have come to happen over the past 30 years. What needed to change so that we ended up in the situation we are now in today? I want to take you back to the situation right at the beginning of the 1990s, late 1980s, just before the internet became something a lot of people could access. and just before, therefore, the invention of the World Wide Web, which made the internet easier to access. This was a time in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when, if we just concentrate on the West, we had democratic societies which were highly centralized in power and authority. They could still at that time be described in terms of the famous image of the English political philosopher Thomas Hobbes, his image of the Leviathan. And I put on the slide a picture of the famous front cover of his book, Leviathan, the picture of the king, or the authority that is the Leviathan, and inside the king are all the human beings that make up, that contribute to the forming of the authority of the king. That was the vision of how societies hold together and don't fall into continuous war. But it was also a globalized world in the late 1980s, early 90s, characterized by lots of conflicts, growing conflicts about culture, about politics, about values. It was a time when institutions were being trusted less and less. It was a time when there was less and less respect for centralized media. It was a time when people like Nicholas Negroponte from MIT were arguing that prime time, the time I spend in the evening in front of the TV, really needed to change to become my time in front of my computer that sent me the information that I really wanted. It was a time of potential change. And out of this time came a dramatic social experiment. A social experiment that I want to argue completely undermined the social authority that Hobbes's model of how politics holds together, of how societies hold together. It undermined that model completely, potentially forever. How did it do this? It did it through some simple steps. The first step was to connect every computer that existed to every other computer through making the internet practicable and building the World Wide Web, which enabled links on computers to be easily exchanged. Then the next step was to massively multiply the number of computers. There were just 2 million computers in the world in 1994. Today, there are many, many billions, if you include not just our personal computers, but those in businesses, those in devices, and so on. And that obviously meant the increasing numbers of computers. It meant hugely multiplying the number of computer connections. There are now trillions and trillions of computer connections across the world. That was the second step. The third step was, because the first two steps wouldn't have changed everything, they would have just meant there are lots of computers and they're all connected. But that would have been a very chaotic world. The third step was the crucial one, to bring into focus, to focus all those connections by something we came to call platforms, privately owned digital interfaces through which we look at a particular part of the connections in this world. The fourth change then ensured that we, all of us, had continuous access to those connections, to those platforms, through mobile computers, through mobile devices. This year, there are now 6.9 billion smartphones in the world. There, in 2021, were 1.3 billion tablets in the world. And then the final step, which happened almost inevitably as part of the first four, was to allow those platforms through which we get a focus on the internet, to allow those platforms to grow super large. The largest platforms are now larger than any nation state in the world, even than India, even than China. And this process, I want to argue, has fundamentally undermined the model of political authority that Thomas Hobbes had in his book, Leviathan. Let me explain what I think it is that's changed. And I'll do that through another diagram. What I've done in this diagram, as you can see, is I've chopped up the body of Leviathan into the actual groups that people spend most of their time with when they're on social media. You can see the people in the diagram. They're still there. They're all men in this old drawing, of course, but they're all looking towards the Leviathan somewhere in the distance. But they're also part of a group that is their group. The lateral connections within the group are therefore really important to them. At the same time, through these arrows, I want to emphasize that I, in my group, am also getting exposed to other groups in the social media space. So just as we in my group send media to each other, media that we receive, say from the BBC or TV Global, we circulate it by Facebook or whatever, but we're also exposed to what other people in their groups are circulating. What's the result of this? I think the result is that increasingly all these connections within our groups and the exposure between our groups is distracting us from that central authority, from the authority of centralized media that were crucial to the idea that the Leviathan still explains how societies hold together. This is the society that has been created through social media. This is our space of the world, and it's a Leviathan in fragments. A Leviathan in fragments. So what is the implications of this? The implication could be, you might say, that civil society is becoming stronger and stronger. You might say that. If it was civil society that was driving this change. But in fact, it was always commercial platforms doing it, which means that what's going on is very different. Because we've allowed these platforms, which create these small groups for us, to be governed by the business model of the platform. What sort of business model? A business model, as with Facebook, that maximizes the number of interactions going on the platform traffic. A business model that encourages, in particular, interactions that circulate media, that send links, that comment on those links, especially ones that will encourage engagement, that will encourage more interactions, more platform traffic. And the business model of the platforms pushes engagement regardless of quality. It doesn't matter to Facebook whether what's circulated is good or bad. It just matters that there's as much engagement with it as possible. And of course, it also circulates, it allows material to circulate on the platform regardless of the scale on which this happens. It doesn't matter, for example, that the murderer who in Christchurch, New Zealand, filmed live as he killed people in a mosque in March 2018. It doesn't matter to Facebook at the time that he did it through his GoPro camera, which he live broadcast on Facebook, because that certainly generated engagement. But it meant that people the other side of the world were linked live to a horrific act in a society 12,000 miles away from them. But from Facebook's point of view, all that matters was the scale of interaction. And that means that if we assume, as I've just hinted, there must be evil somewhere in the world, that means that platforms ensure the maximum circulation of bad information. This might sound shocking, but there's actually a lot of computer science which backs up this finding. I'll just mention one famous paper by MIT data scientist Bosugi and colleagues from 2018. A famous paper in which they showed in relation to Twitter that false information doesn't circulate in the same way that true information does. And they had a very rigorous definition of what is verified to be false and verified to be true. When they tested out those two types of information, they found that falsehoods were more likely to spread faster, deeper, and wider than truth. Faster, deeper, and wider. And the reason for this was that we're more likely to engage with a falsehood than we are with the truth. Because truths are often just obvious. Falsehoods can be exciting, and there are far more falsehoods than there are truths. I'm also drawing here in this analysis on a paper that I wrote with Depine Ghosh of the Harvard Kennedy School, and I'll give you the reference for that later. But this is the argument that I've just summarized, drawing on political science. This is the argument behind the claim I made a few minutes ago that the new space of the world based on platforms is inherently toxic and dangerous. That's the end of the story that I just wanted to tell you. And it's obviously just a story. But it has some key consequences. What I've tried to do in simplified form through the story is show you that we have as citizens allowed the world to be completely reconfigured. The result has been to fundamentally change the nature of political life. And that's something we need to care about. Let's just look in a little bit more detail about what the consequences for political life in particular have been. Here I want to draw on a very important finding from political science, from the Stanford political scientist Shanto Iyengar and colleagues from 2012, where they argue in a very important paper called Affect and Not Opinions, that there is a lot of polarization in American society, but it's not necessarily polarization of knowledge. Many people have access to the same basic news sources because everyone's sharing stuff. But what there is polarization in for sure is emotions, how people feel about themselves, how they feel about those in groups that they think are different from them. Affective polarization. The question then is, how do we explain that affective polarization is growing in American society? And then Iyengar and his colleagues make a very interesting link to a form of social science, social psychology from 1970s, well before the internet was really imagined, long before anything like social media could ever have been thought possible. They go back to the social psychologists Teifel and Turner, who, through experiments that they conducted, showed that polarization, affective polarization, will always grow in spaces that have a certain property. Spaces where people have an opportunity and an incentive to signal their identity, to say, I belong to this group, I like this group, which means I don't like that group. I'm not part of that group. Any space with those basic features will, over time, become more polarized. They argued long before the internet and long before social media, which is very important because what are social media platforms except exactly spaces where people are encouraged to signal their identity, to say, these are my friends, these are the things I like. And they're even encouraged to signal new identities. TikTok encourages us to feel that we like exactly that type of video because it's the one that the algorithm predicts we will exactly like. And this suggests that the polarization that people feel is a feature of today's politics is already a natural feature of today's platforms as they've been designed. But not just that, but that natural feature is intensified by the particular business models that the platforms have to drive for more and more engagement, to encourage us to like more things, to encourage our signal to signal our identity more often. This is a situation where polarization is built in to the space of the world, which can be exploited by key actors, those who want to influence opinion, but also those who want to achieve pure power by using bots, artificial entities on social media, to push people to like what the bots circulate. They want to exploit this situation. It's a situation that is only intensified when the sort of fake news I mentioned a few minutes ago that easily circulates on any platform is incentivized particularly by the platform because they think it's something we're more likely to react emotionally to. And of course, remember, because there are far more lies than there are truths in the world, it's really easy and cheap to invent a lie and put it on a platform so that it's more likely to be circulated. There's so much more I could say about the features of platforms and therefore about the features of the space of the world. And I'm just drawing here on the new book that I'm writing on this topic. But let me just, as I get to the end, bring out some key factors. If today's space of the world is characterized by increased polarization, that is likely to reduce our trust in each other and our trust in facts. But then, as political scientists also point out, those people who have lower trust are also the people who are more likely to believe false information when it's sent to them, because they're not sure whether they should trust even what's true. And that means that's more likely only to increase their polarization, a vicious circle. Reduced trust also undermines necessarily the conditions which support solidarity. I won't be willing to do difficult things, to participate in a campaign, to give money, to take a risk by going on the street in solidarity with others, unless I have some trust in them. But if trust is being reduced, polarization is not good for solidarity. But here, and this is why I'm really writing this book, without solidarity, without more solidarity, we are going to find it very hard as human beings to confront our common challenges. And that's, as the UN Secretary General said in 2021, is what's happening. People are more and more losing touch with trust and solidarity, he said. And that's a really serious problem because, as we all know, unless we confront today's common challenges, above all, the challenge of climate change, then we won't sustain ourselves at all. So that's a basic and fundamental reason why we just can't ignore these problems with the space of the world. So to wrap up, and I've just given you a simplified version of the argument of the book that I'm writing, I think we need now, in the face of these problems, two things. We need a critical theory of how it is that digital technologies, and particularly social media platforms, how have they transformed the space of the world? How are they still transforming it? We need to understand this as clearly as possible and understand the damage it is doing. And then, building from that theory, we need a practical movement together to dismantle and to replace this current space of the world with all its risks with a less toxic one. I don't have the answers to how we're going to do that, of course. It's possible that some of the new federated platforms, which are funded by crowdfunding, collectively funded, not by big business, such as Mastodon, may be the start, may be part of the way forward. But that's very uncertain as yet. But for sure, they're part of a much bigger project, which is how collectively to build a less toxic space of the world that we currently have, that will go on doing damage to our world, to our politics, unless we stop it. Thank you very much for listening. I'm now looking forward to your questions.
Guilherme, para mudar o nosso super-homem precisa fazer a mudança na disposição aí da tela, mas, de qualquer maneira, eu gostaria de agradecer ao Nick Couldry pela palestra não só inspiradora, como também não trouxe respostas exatamente, mas uma série de perguntas que são bem interessantes, provocativas também em relação ao debate, né, que a gente vem fazendo em torno das plataformas digitais. Eu gostaria, primeiramente, de começar com algumas provocações nesse diálogo com o Nick, enquanto também reforço aí que a nossa audiência, que já está com um pouco mais de 60 pessoas na sala, possam enviar as perguntas através desse, né, botão especial do Q&A, do Questions and Answers. Então, primeiramente, eu gostaria de falar dessa minha aproximação nas minhas pesquisas e também no modo como eu uso o trabalho do professor Nick Couldry em relação às minhas disciplinas, né? Porque justamente eu venho de uma área relacionada à política de comunicação e com foco em comunicação comunitária. Então, essa transição que está muito marcada no livro no Nick, na própria trajetória, eu também tenho em relação às minhas pesquisas e atividade também em relação ao movimento de comunicação comunitária no Rio de Janeiro, no Brasil, América Latina. Fui também vice-coordenador da seção de comunicação comunitária da MCA, e a gente vem de um processo justamente em que essa mídia, né, como você chamou, mídia centralizada, né, ela foi respondida justamente com uma promessa de democratização de acesso, da produção, da distribuição, e isso levou mais ou menos uns 10, quase 20 anos, até a gente se dar conta de que os nossos dados estavam não só circulando nessas redes, a partir dessas plataformas digitais, como passaram a ser colonizados, né? Como você mesmo desenvolve nesse seu, né, trabalho mais recente de grande expressão. E aí a gente tem essas várias expressões aí, capitalismo de plataforma, capitalismo de vigilância, todas essas questões sendo trabalhadas como componente de um processo capitalístico que é mais amplo do que simplesmente uma mudança de tecnologia, uma mudança de suporte, ou mesmo de ambiente, ou mesmo de espaço, né? Então, a minha primeira pergunta seria: como, com quem e a partir do que seria possível construir essa proposta de solidariedade humana? Assim, claro que você já deu uma pista no início, que no finalzinho, né, como quem não tem as respostas, mas de qualquer maneira construir um diálogo em torno dessas possibilidades, né? E uma segunda questão, para começar, né, é uma mais específica em relação lá à contribuição do Castells, né? Pelo que parece do trabalho dele, quando ele visibiliza a rede como essa forma, estrutura de organização da sociedade, ele está mais preocupado em revelar ou colocar em evidência aquilo que se compreende como bom, a despeito de problematizar os prós e contras que, né, na década seguinte, a gente vem lidando com mais evidência, mas que já tinha uma certa crítica na época circulando. A gente vai receber um desses críticos antigos aqui no Brasil, né, na semana que vem, o Evgeny Morozov, e já é um crítico da rede há muito tempo, e enquanto a gente tinha outras, né, teorias, visões assim que eram mais normativas em relação à internet, ou mesmo, né, compreensões possíveis dessa lógica de rede como algo potencialmente e invariavelmente bom, né? E aí, assim, como que essa estrutura de rede hoje a gente compreende mais facilmente, controlada por plataformas privadas, ela não reforça a disposição para um espaço mais tóxico, controlado e polarizado, né? A gente precisa enfrentar, né, essa compreensão dessa captura que vai ser colocada para justamente poder fazer a crítica em relação ao ambiente no qual estamos sendo inseridos aí como sociedade. Então, para começar essas duas perguntas, e aí abrir depois para o debate. Mas, professor Nick, por favor, responda.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Adelson, for the questions. And I'm picking up, there are also some questions in the chat as well, which we'll come back to about regulation and also the social drivers of this. How do we build human solidarity? Well, obviously, I don't have the final answers to that. That's the reason I'm writing this book, which was on the final slide. It will come out end of next year, called The Space of the World. I'm not sure of the subtitle. It might be, Can Human Beings Live with Social Media? And What If We Fear We Can't? And in a period when we must have more solidarity, we must have countries coming together across the world to coordinate action around climate change, as of course Brazil has been trying to do more recently under Lula in some ways. This is essential now. Across societies, within societies. We all know this. But if we are at the same time living on spaces which undermine solidarity, we have a deep problem, which we need to think about and try to fix. I think the basic answer of my book will be the way to build solidarity is to think differently about connection. We all want to be connected as we are today is exciting. It's wonderful. I'm talking to you and you're in Brazil. This is fantastic. We all benefit from that. But if the only way we connect a lot of the time is through big commercial platforms that connect all of us at once. If you said to people 30 years ago, the way I want to make the world better is to connect 7 or 8 billion people all at the same time to each other, however bad they are, however bad the stuff they want to circulate, let's put everyone in one big room, people would have said you were crazy. That's what we did. So we have to rethink that structure. And I think one way to do it is the idea which the platform Mastodon has pushed. It's not succeeding at the moment, but the idea is a very strong one of federation. We're all should be in much smaller social networks, which are federated with each other. They're compatible with each other. They can link across, but they're not compelled to. So people in smaller communities have the chance to manage the borders around their community. I think this is a much better idea. So that potentially is one way to build on the solidarity we already have, rather than destroy it. At the moment, we're destroying solidarity through the space of the world that we've created. Your second question about Castells, and you also mentioned Morozov. This is interesting because Morozov is interesting, of course, because he's not only done wonderful work, but also he's currently writing, and he's done a film about a blog about the cyber sin movement in Chile in the 1970s. And I just mentioned Ricardo Flores in my talk, who was part of that movement. And that was a vision of a different way of connecting the world up, based around public values, socialism. So the commercial model we have, driven by the United States, is obviously not the only way of connecting people up and thinking about connection. But that model didn't develop in the 1970s, so we don't know what its future would have been. Now we have to recover these sort of ideas. That means we do need to think about what Castells talks about, which is how networks are made visible. He was right 20, 30 years ago to say that society was changing through the building of these networks. He didn't yet know about social media. But his mistake, and I agree with Morozov, was to emphasize too much the technological basis of this and to look at it at a systems level and to say less and less about the impacts for human beings. But the irony is that at the beginning of his work in 1996, he did see the tension. He did see the problem. This phrase about a metasocial disorder suggested he knew that there were big problems coming. But then in his later work, he says less and less about those problems, and he celebrates the Arab Spring, how we mobilize through platforms more and more successfully. And as we know, the Arab Spring did not end well. So there are problems with Castell's work, but his fundamental insight was correct. And that's interesting because no one else at that time saw where things were going. So that's what I'd say about Castell's. I know we've also got, I can't keep up with them, questions about platform regulation. I'm happy to come back to that. Another question about social. Isn't this all really social rather than technical? I can come back to that. I see Bruno Campanella, my dear friend, has a question about new forms of citizenship. And Victor Vicenti has a question about the federated networks. I think we should come back to that. That's an important one. Do you want me, and there are probably many more questions as well, would you like me, Professor Adelson, to try and answer some of these questions from the chat, or will you maybe guide me to them? What you prefer.
Temos o colega, o Guilherme, ele está fazendo um resumo e colocando no chat,
Good.
e eu vou colocar para você.
Yeah.
A primeira pergunta do Gilberto Schofield a respeito da regulação das plataformas seria parte de uma melhor solução. Eu vou fazer 3, em bloco de 3. Parte de uma melhor solução para a situação, já que ela vem sendo pensada em outros países, né? Uma segunda pergunta do Frederico Reis, né, que pensa que uma importante também é importante também questionar por que escolhemos as plataformas da forma que as utilizamos hoje e que através do tempo mais redes sem algoritmos, mas as pessoas em geral preferem receber redes sociais mediadas por algoritmos, e essa questão de, por exemplo, ter uma rede como o Mastodon como uma referência que não necessariamente tenha aderência das pessoas, né? A tentativa de fazer uma rede alternativa à rede controlada e essa rede simplesmente não ter adesão das pessoas, né? Então, o que seria mais relacionado a uma questão social do que uma questão tecnológica ou uma questão regulatória. Como é que você vê isso? E uma terceira pergunta relacionada do Lúcio Melo, a respeito da interferência da mídia na sociedade e os seus efeitos, como inicialmente percebidos, identificados como mediatização, e logo depois a questão da noção da mídia, como muda, né, em relação à presença ubíqua e relacionada à construção social. E como você vê essa dialética entre o processo de mediatização e como esse processo de territorialização, depois do que os pesquisadores alemães, como a Martina Low, chamam de reconfiguração do espaço. Como criar, então, esses espaços de resistência e solidariedade? Voltamos à minha primeira pergunta e a luta continua. Então, esse primeiro bloco de 3 perguntas, Nick, passando a bola para você.
Thank you. I'll try to answer some of these. As Gilberto says, regulation is part of the solution. I think that's right. 10 years ago, under Dilma Rousseff, Brazil was leading some of the global debate on this, and then other things happened. And I hope Brazil will come back to be a leading force in the global debate. But we've had EU with its GDPR, and the recent legislation is important. I think, to be honest, the more recent, there are problems with the EU position, even though it seems very bold. And the reason is that the GDPR was based around the principle of consent. So as long as you ask for your consent, and as long as you agree, give your consent, then the extraction of data can continue. And as many people have shown, consent can easily be extracted from you in unequal market situations. So I think there are problems with that, and the recent EU legislation is much closer to the business logics of big tech and less close to citizens' perspectives. So I think it's not clear the EU now has the answers. So far, the US has not provided radical answers because of its conservatism, but the new Federal Trade Commission under Lina Khan is doing a consultation at the moment about much more radical restrictions on big tech, which would actually start to challenge the business models that I was talking about. But this has not yet developed into real proposals for legislation. But we do, as Gilberto say, need to hope there will be regulation for one very important reason, which is that in the extremely unequal world of global platforms, they are currently dominated by American platforms with some very powerful Chinese platforms as well, such as TikTok above all. And those things are not going to change at all unless those platforms are deeply regulated. And one key way in which they might be regulated is to allow people to move more freely from them, transferring their contacts. And this leads to the second point, or one of the points made by Federico was this really a free choice, that we actually choose the platforms that we have? Certainly that's what the platforms want to tell us. I don't believe that's true, though. One of the reasons is the one I just mentioned, that if you, let's say as I did on Twitter, build up 10,000 contacts, I can't just transfer those 10,000 contacts to Mastodon, not even if all those 10,000 people were on Mastodon, because the technology will not allow me to do it. I am locked in to Twitter in that sense. And as the novelist Cory Doctorow has written about in his new book, The Internet Con, this is the way platforms work, precisely to lock us in to their structures. And so that means we really don't have a free social choice as to which social platforms we want to be on. And that means we also don't have a free choice when we move to a new one, such as TikTok, when we find that it's increasingly driven by algorithms. Yes, it's true that everyone likes to have videos which are relevant to them, but no one has control over the consequences of that becoming their habit. And it's the consequences of that we need to think about, because those consequences are not advertised by the platforms. They're not talking about any of the problems that I've been talking about. They're not talking about the crisis of mental health in the US, which even the Surgeon General, the chief medical officer in the US, now attributes partly to social media. They don't talk about that. Those were not the things they told us about when we made the supposedly free choice to choose to be on those platforms. But we did, because our contacts are there. We face a resistance to moving. That's inevitable. But that doesn't mean to say this is a free choice. Leading on to Lucia's point about mediatization, referring back to my earlier work, yes, all this can be seen as part of mediatization, as the deepening of the impact of the mediation of every aspect of social life on the structure of society. And it's now spreading, as Lucia said, to the organization of space. And although I didn't make the link in the talk, I think one can say that it's only because of mediatization, that is the way we build media into our everyday life, including building computers, like mobile phones, into every aspect of our everyday life, it's only because that has happened that this radical new possibility of engineers not just designing software, but designing the world that we live in when we use the devices that have run that software, it's only because of mediatization that this fundamental new space of the world has become possible. But I didn't talk much about mediatization because it only tells us the starting point. It doesn't really explain how this has unfolded, what are the dynamics that's given this particular features. And you also ask, how are spaces of resistance possible? Well, one space of resistance can be formed by not being on these social media networks. But for the reasons we just mentioned, that isn't easy. So the next form of resistance means to think deeply about the type of space that has been created through these networks and whether we could design a different space. Which reminds me, I didn't answer the other point that Federico made, which was about why has Mastodon not been so successful? Not so far. One reason is the one I gave, that it's difficult to transfer all your contacts to Mastodon from Twitter. I've had that problem. I use Mastodon. It's not yet so convenient for me. The other thing is that the federated structure that Mastodon rightly chooses is a little more complicated. People need to get used to it. And until everyone gets used to it, it will not become as useful a network to be on as Twitter still is. So change is hard to happen, but that doesn't mean to say we can ignore the problems. As I said, we have no choice but to face these problems. So it becomes a collective challenge to try and meet them together and help each other address these issues. Thanks. Ready for more questions?
Ok, Nick, nós temos uma nova leva de perguntas, né? Em primeira, a Adriana do Amaral que pergunta se o próximo passo seria quebrarmos os algoritmos e driblar o poder das plataformas comerciais. E aí tem uma ligação também com uma proposta dentro desse campo da economia política, da comunicação, e mais especificamente Vicente Mosco, que fala em desregulamentação das grandes plataformas. O próprio Vincent Lee chegou a fazer uma declaração a respeito, né? Então, essa seria uma proposta. Uma segunda pergunta do Vitor Vicente: por que você acredita que as redes federadas são o caminho viável para o futuro? Ao invés de perseguir uma descentralização radical, não poderíamos considerar uma abordagem mais centralizada, e aí considerando justamente lutar por dentro dos próprios espaços constituídos, já que eles envolvem também, né, a própria constituição de uma nova esfera pública. Então, seriam essas duas perguntas para o momento. Depois a gente vê mais outra. Não, tem uma terceira pergunta do seu amigo Bruno Campanella, chegou aqui. Além de agradecer pela palestra, você vê a criação de novos modos de cidadania nesse mundo que você descreve hoje? Você percebe, compreende a criação desses novos mundos de cidadania nesse mundo a ser construído? Então, são essas três para esse bloco.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for all these excellent questions. Adriana's point, yes, I think that, as you put it, one key step is, as you put it, to break the algorithms. I wouldn't say break the algorithms, because algorithms are just machines to do calculations. What is crucial is the way they're designed, and the way they're designed, which is driven by business models. So, for example, the algorithms that operate on social media platforms are, in spite of the differences between them, all aimed basically to maximize our engagement with the platform. Engagement, however the platform defines it, because that's what it wants. That's how it increases its income from the advertisers, who also want to see engagement with whatever is on the platform. So it's the business model that drives the definition of engagement and the need to get engagement that is based around the economics of the platform that is the key thing. The algorithm is just the machine to achieve that end. So we need to break, yes, not the algorithms, but the business models. We need to challenge the business models. And going back to Gilberto's point about regulation, this is exactly what regulation so far has not done in any country in the world, including the EU. It's only the US right now that is starting to think about this possibility of breaking the business models. But this is the essential step. And that may also mean breaking up platforms. As some people have said, just breaking up Facebook into 2 half Facebooks or 4 quarter Facebooks won't change the problem fundamentally, because they will still be very, very large and they'll still be run by the same business model. The better approach to breaking platforms up is to allow this to happen naturally, which is the proposal of Cory Doctorow and others, that it is essential that people should be able to transfer all their contacts from one platform to another, which means that if they genuinely want to join another platform, they can, and there's nothing that can stop them. As we know, when Elon Musk took over Twitter, a lot of people wanted to leave Twitter because they didn't like Elon Musk. But many people didn't leave Twitter because they didn't know how to get all their contacts across and to create new contacts on Mastodon. And this meant that the initial rush to Mastodon did not develop. So this idea of transferability of context is really important and could lead much more effectively to the rejection of the size of the platforms. Victor's point about why do I believe that federated platforms are better? Well, I think you're right to be skeptical, Victor, because I think, let's be honest, we are just at the beginning of this debate right now. How should we redesign the space of the world? I think the idea of federation is one important idea because it raises the question of how the whole space connects together. It deals with the question of architecture, and it puts the emphasis on small communities doing the moderation closer to home, if you like, closer to the people that they know, whose interests they know. And I think this is a fundamentally correct idea. My worry about alternative models, for example, public models of social media platforms that maybe keep the size the same. Let's say you have one social media platform just for Brazil, funded through public money and so on. I think there are inherent problems with the size of these platforms. They're just too large to be capable of being moderated adequately. You need smaller groupings on social media for them not to have these toxic effects built into them. And that's why I'm skeptical about the possibility of simply transferring ownership. But you're right. The role of public ownership, or at least public subsidy, is also a very important part. And that's why I mentioned in passing that Mastodon, although the money isn't public, it is money that comes from the community. It's based around crowdfunding, not private finance. So I think you're right. We also need to consider the funding and the role of public resources in enabling a better social media infrastructure to be built. But I still think the idea of federation is important. As to Bruno's point, thank you very much, Bruno. Great, you could be part of this. Bruno's question about new modes of citizenship. Well, at the moment, I'm not very optimistic. I know you, in your book that's coming out on recognition and social media, which to everyone in the call, in the meeting, is going to be a very important book coming out in English just in a few months' time. In your book, Bruno, you do explore whether it's possible to build new forms of recognition through social media. And these things are happening. There are movements building in social media. For example, Black Lives Matter in the US, and so on. The Me Too movement, also starting in the US. Other movements across the world have had some successes in building solidarity online. And I don't deny that for a moment. but we have to set those successes alongside the failures, the disasters, the extremely polarized situations where politics has collapsed in Myanmar, in India, Kenya, in many other countries where the push towards polarization that is built into social media platforms has led to disastrous results. And we could also relate this to the so-called rise of populist politics in many parts of the world. So I'm not sure I would go so far as to say that new forms of citizenship are developing, but I believe that if we can do better in getting the structure, the architecture of social media platforms right, then there will be ways of encouraging new forms of online citizenship. And this is something I want to talk about in the final chapter of my book, which I haven't written yet, where I want to explore the concept of resonance, the idea that as we struggle to deal with a massive global problem like climate change, we can work together independently in smaller communities to resonate with each other, to do parallel things, aware of each other, but not constantly having to be in the face of each other as we are on the current social media platforms with all their polarizing properties. So thanks for those 3 questions. I look forward to any more.
Obrigado, Nick. Nós vamos para uma outra leva de 3 perguntas e um bloco mais relacionados também nessa linha de cidadania, mas pessoas, sociedade, mais do que tecnologia, mas não se desconectando ou se desfazendo das tecnologias, né? Em primeiro lugar, uma pergunta da Márcia Bessa, querida. Acredito que a questão da solidariedade passa sempre pela educação, independente do ambiente em que estamos. A melhoria da solidariedade das plataformas digitais a médio e longo prazo não passaria necessariamente por uma revolução na educação básica? E aí, complementando, a solução não estaria mais num ser humano melhor formado e acolhido do que na própria configuração das plataformas digitais? E aí, compreendendo a plataforma digital como uma consequência, né, dessa construção social, educacional, humana. A segunda pergunta da Cíntia Freire, também uma colocação, estamos conectados, fazendo apenas o que queremos, temos a vida que queremos, estamos com as pessoas que queremos estar, nossa família, amigos, nosso novo modo de viver, baseado em novas ideologias de vida oferecidas por essa conexão. As plataformas também trabalham com esse humano que curte ser o centro. Será que queremos, como humanidade, essas mudanças que, em relação à construção da plataforma ou não? E que diálogo, né, construir para isso tem muito a ver com uma das primeiras perguntas que eu fiz, que seria com quem construir essa solidariedade humana, né? E uma terceira pergunta aqui do Lúcio Melo: a apropriação da internet que Tiziana Terra Nova identificou no início dos anos 2000 foi chamada de um novo tipo de inclusa, como na Revolução Industrial. Você acredita que essa analogia com a Revolução, como uma nova Revolução Industrial, uma nova virada, ela seria válida em relação à internet, mesmo às plataformas digitais?
Again, thank you very much. I wish I could understand Portuguese direct, because I may miss some of the subtleties of what you're saying, but the translators are being very helpful. Marcia's question about the links to education. I think this is a very fundamental point you've raised, Marcia, and it links to political theory. I didn't say much about political theory except Thomas Hobbes in the lecture, but there are basically in history 2 theories about how good politics is possible in the world. One is the Thomas Hobbes idea that the norm is brutal violence, but because each of us has an interest in preventing violence, because it stops us making money and living comfortably, if there's a sufficient central authority in society, which we are all regulated by, then it's possible that we can have politics which isn't violent. That's the first model. And I talked about how that is breaking apart because of the way that society is being fragmented through social media. But there's another model which relates to your question, Marcia, which is the model that there is something positive about politics. This was Aristotle's view that man, as he put it, is a political animal. We're naturally political. We want to organize things better in our local communities. But this theory of politics as positive has as its root, particularly in the later developments in Rousseau and 19th century theorists, the idea that we need to be socialized, we need to be educated to become citizens. Well, then the question is, how are we being educated for politics today? There's no doubt we are given many opportunities to say what we think online, to shout, to scream, to be angry. We're being educated in that. But a lot of the psychological evidence, mainly dominated so far by the evidence from the US, it's true, but also from the UK and parts of Europe. Much of the evidence is that instead of being educated for politics, people are increasingly being polarized, they're becoming depressed, they're becoming more lonely, and so on and so forth. None of these are positive for socializing people for politics. So what we do need to go back to as part of this transformation is to the idea of educating people for politics, which is closer to Paulo Freire's idea of communal discussion, re-education, conscientização, which enables people to have a better understanding of themselves and their society, which is not what people are getting through the polarized environments of social media, in my view. Which takes us on to Cynthia's comment about family and connections. And of course, you're right, Cynthia. We all want connections. I love using WhatsApp to send pictures to my family. I'm sure you do too. This is natural because human beings want to connect. We naturally connect. We're social animals. But what we have to do, and this is why I developed this concept of the space of the world, it's very important to keep separate our natural need for connectivity and the particular form that need takes under a particular system, under a particular type of platform that is driven by a particular business model, driven by profit, as opposed to what our connectivity would look like in a different platform. In a different world, maybe where we spend less of our time on platforms. This is the difference, the distinction that we need to make. Because of course, we all want connectivity and I'm absolutely not against connectivity. As to Lucia's question about whether this is a new industrial revolution, and of course, you mentioned Tiziana Terranova's work, who I know very well from many years ago. We did our PhDs at the same time. In fact, at the Goldsmiths College. Tiziana Terranova was one of the very first people to spot something very important, which is that people were working online for no money, and that this was being exploited by businesses online, which then became platforms. She was right to spot this as a fundamental expansion of the world of capitalist work. So you're asking, do I think that what we're talking about here can be explained entirely in terms of capitalism? But as Adelson has been referring to, I don't think that, because I'm with Ulises Mejias from Mexico. We've developed this theory of data colonialism. And the argument, in short, is that although what's going on with platforms is also part of the extension of capitalism, the other side of it is you can never separate capitalism from colonialism. Capitalism emerged out of colonialism. It emerged from colonialism's ability to seize the assets of the world for the interests of the elite few, for the interests of particular countries. And that land grab that started colonialism 5 centuries ago is, we believe, continuing with the data extraction on today's platforms, which is what drives this desire to make money through algorithms out of spying on us as we interact. So there is this deeper connection with both colonialism and capitalism. Is it a fundamental change? Yes, I think it is a really fundamental change, but the reason is not so much to do with the techniques of capitalism as to do with this fundamental new stage of colonialism, which is the seizing of a new asset, which isn't just land, it isn't just bodies to work the land or the gold and other things found in the land, it's human life itself, which is available as raw material through the platform from which data can be extracted. That is a fundamental change in human history. And I think we will look back in hundreds of years' time and see what's happening now as a turning point in human history. Whether it's a turning point for the better because we deal with the risks, we will see. But at the moment, I'm not sure.
Ok, Nick, obrigado por essa nova leva de respostas. Nós ainda temos uma pergunta aqui da Débora, mais na linha das possibilidades de luta por dentro e das reações também que essa luta por dentro proporciona justamente no ambiente que estimula a polarização, né? Mas antes, né, tem um agradecimento aqui, querido, dela, a sua palestra, considerando que a pesquisa dela é voltada para... Ela é aluna do PPGMC no mestrado, mestranda nossa, a pesquisa dela é sobre cultura do cancelamento, ativismo digital e ódios imaginários. Aí ela pergunta quais são os seus pensamentos sobre esse movimento cultural que cresceu após o Me Too, nos Estados Unidos e conquistando, né, outras conexões no mundo todo, no qual usuários de redes sociais, especialmente no ex-Twitter, agora X, buscam justiça social e expandir também discussões sobre questões como racismo, misoginia, LGBTQIA-fobia, e, contudo, o resultado, muitas vezes, acaba aumentando o ódio e a vigilância online numa espécie de regresso aos julgamentos em praça pública, geralmente não permitindo desculpas ou reparações e provocando danos, até mesmo profissionais, também pessoais, né, aos atingidos, né? Então, como é que você vê essa tentativa de mobilização, organização por dentro, mas que acaba também tendo efeitos colaterais?
Well, thank you very much, Deborah. I saw your question earlier, and I think that's very, very important. And if this is the last question, I think it's a very important question to end with. Although I see Federico has made more comments, and there are lots of comments developing, but let's stay with this one about fighting from within. You're right. Even if I'm correct, and we are able to, in the next 5 to 10 years, fundamentally reorganize social media platforms, which is a big if. Even if that's true, there will be the next 5 to 10 years where we have to live with the social media platforms we have. And as I said, even in the EU, even in the US, even in the largest economies in the world, with the most powerful states, we do not have an adequate regulatory model right now. So you're right, we have to deal with this. So fighting within the platforms will be partly important. It's possible to withdraw from the platforms, but if you need quickly to connect with people, then you may have little choice but to use these platforms for mobilization. Of course, I accept that, and Ulysses also accepts that in our book. We never argue that people should withdraw from platforms. Everyone must make their own choice, depending on their situation. So then the question is, what happens when we stay within the platforms? And as you say, there are many different outcomes. One success movement is the Black Lives Matter movement in the US, and in general, Black Twitter, which many people argue, there are many books on this, was extraordinarily successful in adopting a commercial platform like Twitter and using it as a space where Black people at last had some freedom to speak for themselves and talk about racial injustice and white violence against Black people. And that was very important and tested in an extreme way in 2020 and afterwards. Many people in that movement, though, argued that there are limits to that and that you can only achieve so much through online movements because you need offline solidarity as well. So there were debates within that movement, which I can't judge, not being part of it. The Me Too movement is also very important. And I think you're right, because of the polarizing tendencies, which are inherent to the platforms, which are not part and the type of space that they are. And we can go back to social psychology to explain this. It's not just about the business models. The business models make that tendency worse. That means that even if we don't intend it, there will be risks of polarization. And I think this is leading to more and more difficult conversations and breakdowns in conversations in our societies, which are not helpful, which are not positive for building solidarity about other issues, such as climate change, where we absolutely must have solidarity, where regardless of our differences, we have to work together because we only have one planet, which we all need to save. So I think this is a very difficult problem. I think in the short term, something could be done to force platforms to reduce the incentives they give all the time to people to engage more, because these are the root of the problem. We can also do some of the things the platforms are already doing, which is discouraging retweeting without opening the underlying tweet, not showing likes and so on. But I think it's a paradox that the platforms who make their money about us out of our engaging more have increasingly, because of the social problems they're causing through these business models, they've increasingly been forced to try and stop people engaging more, to stop people circulating more. And that must be a sign that the business model is wrong, that these platforms are basically trying to do the wrong thing. We don't need platforms that incentivize us to engage more. We just need platforms with those who we have trust, where we have a chance to engage as we want to engage without being pushed to do anything. So I think the challenge to the business models is fundamental. And I think we need movements and activism which focuses on that, because otherwise we ensure that the conditions of political life will remain toxic most of the time. And that is bad for society and it's bad for politics, even if sometimes there are success stories. That's the key thing we have to deal with. And that does partly go back to regulation, but it also goes back to our own action as citizens in trying to become less reliant on these platforms, build other platforms, and find other ways of building solidarity together, not on the platforms. I hope that's answered your question in some way.
É baita desafio, né? E eu acho que ele está colocado para todos nós, né? Não só sul global, norte global, mas enfim, as pessoas que estão sendo, né, exploradas, oprimidas por esse ambiente que é extremamente não só concentrador, mas também colonizador da nossa existência, né? E é uma questão que se coloca frontalmente para as nossas pesquisas. E aí, mais uma vez, Nick, eu gostaria de agradecer a sua, né, participação, presença, embora à distância, mas, enfim, permitida pelas, né, plataformas digitais, pela Zoom, Microsoft, mas é também uma iniciativa do Programa de Pós-Graduação em Mídia Cotidiano. É interessante também mencionar, né, a gente faz parte, pelo EMERGE, pelo grupo de pesquisa que eu coordeno, a professora Raquel Bertol, pelo grupo que ela coordena também. Ela é coordenadora, inclusive, de uma rede nacional de combate à desinformação, que está fazendo parte de uma coalizão global pela justiça tecnológica, seria em inglês Global Coalition for Tax Justice, que está reivindicando junto à Comissão Europeia a aplicação correta, justa, adequada da DSA, né, da Lei de Serviços Digitais, né, que está correndo pela União Europeia. E a gente está aderindo pela rede de combate à desinformação, então, assim, estamos conectados, né, pela boa conexão, né? E aí, nesse intuito, eu gostaria de agradecer, em nome do programa de pós-graduação, nosso coordenador, Pablo Navarrete, está perto aí de você, em algum lugar entre Liverpool e Manchester, aproveitando as suas merecidas férias, mas logo, logo está de volta. E, ao mesmo tempo, assim, reforçar que esse debate, né, continue aí nas suas próximas contribuições e possíveis interações aí com a gente. Muito obrigado, Nick. Sua palavra para considerações finais.
Well, thank you very much, Adelson. I just mentioned to you in the chat, I couldn't find a way to speak to the general chat. There's a network that I'm involved in building called tierracomún.net, .org, which is a 3-language network in Spanish, Portuguese, and English, which is a network for fighting data colonialism, and might be interesting to some of you. Tierracomún.net, but it's in Portuguese, Spanish, and English. Mm-hmm. It might be of interest, and I'm very interested to hear the network you're talking about. These are very big issues. They will go on developing, I believe, Brazil, because the intensity with which Brazil became involved with social media, again, as Bruno Campanella wrote about in his work, and many of you have, is a very important country from which to ask these questions. I'm in touch with others in Brazil, like Virgilio Almeida, the computer scientist who's interested in these issues, particularly around Twitter. So I look forward to more collaborations. I do hope that it might be possible to visit Niterói and Fluminense again. I vividly remember it. As I said, it was raining hard the day I came, but I hope next time it will be sunny. And I very much hope to get the chance to come back to Rio again sometime, because it's one of my very favorite cities in the world. But it's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you for all your very interesting questions. And congratulations on the 10th anniversary of the Media and Everyday Life program. I look forward maybe to speaking at your 20th anniversary in 10 years' time.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Hoje é o último dia de um grande pequeno verão aqui no nosso meio de inverno. Está fazendo por volta de 110, 115 graus Fahrenheit, então é bem diferente de quando você veio. Amanhã começa uma frente fria, mas hoje o dia está um sol para cada um, como dizemos no Rio. E, bom, de qualquer maneira, assim, a sua, né, palestra foi muito interessante aí para dar food for thought aí para as nossas pesquisas. Então, muito obrigado novamente aí em nome do programa e um abraço a todos também que fugiram da praia, fugiram do sol, do chopp gelado, e tiveram aí nessa tarde bacana no Rio de Janeiro aí, e outros lugares do Brasil também, que tem gente de fora do Rio aqui participando. Muito obrigado aí, uma boa tarde, gente. Tchau, tchau, um abraço.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Tem que fechar a gravação. Oi, oi, oi.